I'm Lisa Fletcher, and you're in the stream. Today, struggling for lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgendered acceptance in Asia. We'll look at how activists are making gains for the rights of sexual and gender minorities. Our digital producer, Malika Bilal, has been keeping up with all of your online comments on this issue. Tweet her using the hashtag AJStream. Malika, our community not as active as we normally see it.
You're right. We're not seeing as many tweets as we typically do, but let's change that. So for those of you at home, we want you to answer the question that we're tweeting out right now. Will increased visibility of LGBT people, lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender in Asia mean that more rights or greater discrimination? Send us your answers for the hashtag AJStream.
All right, and joining us in studio is Grace Poor. She is the Asia and Pacific Islands Program Coordinator for the International Gay, Lesbian, and Human Rights Commission. Grace, welcome to the stream.
Thank you.
I'm glad to have you here.
Thank you.
Now, you can add your voice to this conversation as always. You can do it with a video comment. If you have a webcam, just visit stream.aljazeera.com and click on that red button right there on the right of your screen. It's really easy, and it's a great way for you to be in the stream.
My name is Syed. I'm studying public health at Dartmouth. I'm an aspiring physician and a space enthusiast, and I'm in the stream.
Lesbian, gays, and transgenders throughout Asia are standing up for rights that they say are long overdue. Across Asia, LGBT activists, or those fighting for lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgendered people, are starting to change social attitudes, and they're increasing the visibility of sexual and gender minorities, many of whom once had to hide their true selves from society. In the past year, Taiwan had its first same-sex Buddhist wedding. Vietnam, Myanmar, and Laos held their first gay pride parades. And now, Nepal issues government-approved IDs for a third gender. And while some parts of Asia are slowly opening up to the discussion of LGBT issues, many countries in the region still criminalize homosexuality and have laws that target and discriminate against transgenders. So, in the countries where change has occurred, what factors played a role in changing mindsets towards sexuality and gender, and what challenges remain? And just to be clear, throughout the program today, we're going to be using that abbreviation LGBT when referring to lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgendered persons. So, Grace, those questions we just posed, as good a place as any to start. You know, in Asia, there are several countries talking about legalizing gay marriage. There's Nepal, Taiwan, Vietnam. What do you think is contributing to these more open ideas of sexuality and gender identity?
I think the judiciary has taken some progressive steps. They have actually led the way. In Nepal, for instance, it was the Supreme Court that ordered the Nepal legislature to look into violations against LGBT people. Similarly, more recently in Singapore, the appeals court actually, in its judicial review, said that 377A does violate the constitutional rights of Singaporeans. And of course, the landmark decision in India by the Delhi High Court, which read down 377A, which said that law cannot be applied to adults in consenting same-sex relationships.
Isn't it interesting, though, because these things, they don't usually happen from the top down, especially when you're talking about social change. It's usually, at least in the Western world, a very bottom-up, grassroots swelling of support. Did you not see those things in Vietnam and Nepal?
Yes, I think so. And also in India, I think, you know, because it's, I guess the way to say it is you need a grassroots movement. But if people in power, people who actually can change policy, don't listen to the grassroots, then you get nowhere. So the courts seem to be listening.
Well, our community is also listening, and we're getting responses from people telling us what it's like in their part of the world. This is a Facebook comment from Mace Francis. She says, "It's heartbreaking that here in Indonesia, no one talks about it openly. We know that LGBT people exist, but we're not acknowledged in any way." I want to pose our next video comment to a member of our Hangout, Ines Angela. You're coordinator for advocacy in Indonesia at the Network of Gay, Transgender, and Transgendered People. Have a listen to this video comment.
The LGBT communities in Indonesia are thriving, but so is the resistance from conservative forces, sometimes to the point of physical violence. Unfortunately, the Indonesian government is not doing anything about it.
Would you agree with that? That the government is not doing anything about it?
Oh, well, actually, yeah. They don't do anything about it.
Could you elaborate a little bit more about what you're seeing specifically?
Well, for transgender people in Indonesia, we still have we still faces any discrimination and stigma also as well.
And of course, Indonesia is the most populous Muslim country in the world. Yeah. Faith naturally plays into this. What are your relationships with the faith communities, and how does that play into it?
Yeah, the fundamentalism faith-based organization also do something like attack when we make any convention and any beauty pageant and everything like that. Sometimes they come to attack us.
Grace, there are a lot of conservative nations in Asia that still criminalize homosexuality. How do you go about seeking equal protection among such a patchwork of cultural differences?
There are so many differences in the Asia region, social differences, cultural differences, political differences, and I think that these differences really affect the attitudes towards people, LGBT people. And so, as you said, it's a patchwork, but there are some common threads, and some of the countries in Asia who have the British colonial legacy and have anti-sodomy laws, they criminalize LGBT people. There are other countries who have dominant religions, where the religious officials, religious leaders influence government policy. There are some countries where the religious groups are not the majority, but still influence government policy. So how do you go about trying to find multiple entry points to make the case that LGBT people have rights, LGBT people's rights need to be taken into consideration, need to be protected, and that LGBT people really need to thrive and do well and be allowed to lead our lives.
Do you start in places where you may find a path of lesser resistance, perhaps in countries that maybe Buddhism is the dominant religion or Hinduism, where there seems to be a little more open-mindedness or acceptance of these ideas?
I think Rosanna can speak to that, since she can speak to Sri Lanka, and Sri Lanka is a Buddhist country. But I don't think religion is the problem. I think it's the misuse of religion. And I think that even in a country like Indonesia, where there are majority Muslims, there is a very small number of Muslims in Indonesia who are vehemently opposed to LGBT rights. And they don't only oppose verbally, but they use physical tactics of intimidation and violence to attack LGBT people. So it's how loud the voices of those minority people are, and how much government wants to listen and feel like it needs to take their side against other people's side. And when I say other people, I mean moderate people who say, let LGBT people be part of our society, part of our community.
Well, earlier in your answer, you mentioned entry points and multiple entry points and how to make this discussion further. Of course, at the top of the show, we asked if maybe one of those entry points could be increased visibility. We got lots of responses. Angela says, visibility is credibility. We are everywhere. Another tweet from Miriam who says, increased visibility and discussion will ultimately help in discrimination through education and law change. And this next one I want to pose to Rosanna Flammer Caldera in our Google Plus Hangout. Rosanna is from Sri Lanka. This tweet says, no, visibility, it just means that they will be easier to find and target for removal. They will only be tolerated if they are unseen. Rosanna, you're executive director at Equal Ground in Sri Lanka. Would you agree with that?
Yes and no, actually. I mean, in my country, there is a certain amount of fear about being out, especially with the current political climate. But Equal Ground is one of the only organizations in Sri Lanka that operates quite visibly, and my face actually is splashed in on the TV and in the newspapers. So there is a certain amount of I suppose trepidation going along with that. But I really feel that if we need to gain rights, we need to come out en masse and demand those rights rather than hiding in a closet, because we have nothing to be ashamed of, and if we don't stand up for our rights, then nobody else is going to stand up for us. So I realize that people are afraid, and people come out at their own particular time, but there is a momentum being gained in worldwide where LGBT rights are concerned. I mean, if you see what's happening, across the globe in recent times, it just shows that there is a lot of concern for LGBT rights worldwide, and I think we need to, stand up and be counted, even in countries such as ours, where things aren't, so great for LGBT people here.
Charlize Sabale, you are the Society of Transsexual Women for the Philippines. You're a part of that organization. And Grace was just talking about the LGBT community generally and saying it wants to be part of society, it wants to be part of the community, which I think may lead a lot of our viewers to ask the question, well, aren't they already? What's preventing them from being part of the community, part of society? Can you enlighten us on that point?
There's still a lot of prejudice and discrimination that although we are part of the society, we are faced with a lot of discrimination and prejudice. So we feel that we're kind of part of it, but we're kind of not really part of it. And for the Philippines, for the trans, especially for the trans community, we don't have a law that recognizes our gender. So technically, we are invisible in the law, and if we are invisible in the law, we don't exist. So we're not part of the society. So that's also a problem. Legal recognition of transgender women.
Grace, you wrote an article about this, and you were talking about how women in parts of Asia are facing somewhat of a double and even triple threat, because in a lot of Asia, women are already discriminated against heavily for just being women. And then you add the LGBT component, and things get very dangerous. Talk about those types of things. Talk about the issues these women face.
Well, women who, when morality shapes how people receive other people, whether it's how people are treated as neighbors, how people are treated within the home, how people are treated by the law, you can see that some people's rights, like some women's rights, are considered to be more important. Some women are considered to be quote-unquote real women versus not real women. And so when you have protections, for instance, in many Asian countries now, they have laws to prohibit rape, to prohibit domestic violence, violence in the family. But those extensions, those laws don't extend to lesbians, bisexual women, and trans people. Now, why is that? Is that because LGBT people are not women? We are women.
So you mean if a woman is a victim of violence brought against her by her family, and she is a lesbian, or a lesbian or transgendered woman is a victim of domestic abuse by her partner, that is not recognized under the law as a crime?
Yes, in many countries it's not. And women who try to use that law that protects other women, lesbians for instance, first have to come out. And when you're living in conditions where it is risky to come out, either because you have a law that criminalizes you, or people can use the information about the fact that you're a lesbian to target you for attacks, using the law doesn't protect you. So there has to be a safe environment in which you can actually access justice. Just having the law doesn't help. But there are many countries where the law actually does not state that same-sex couples also have protections from domestic violence. So the law does not extend to LGBT. Now, Hong Kong is an exception, one exception. They fought for it. They struggled a lot for it. And conservative Christians were opposed. They said, the moment you include same-sex couples for protection under this law, you're basically going to be endorsing same-sex marriage. So they were completely opposed to providing protections to people because of some strange concept about who's acceptable and who's not, what's moral, what's immoral. But they prevailed. And how they prevailed was the governor agreed to change the name of the law and made it some very convoluted name that did not say same-sex, did not say domestic partnerships. But the point is
protections.
Right. Yeah. But the point is they do have protections.
Well, our community is talking about how to go about changing perceptions. There's a video comment here on Singapore, and I'd like to pose it to another member of our Hangout, Jean Chong, who will be speaking to us from Singapore. Have a listen to this.
Hi, my name's Kirsten, and I'm a Singaporean currently living in Cardiff. My question is, how has sex education impacted on Singaporean society's acceptance of homosexuals and the gay rights movement. Thank you.
And Jean works for an organization to empower Asian queer women, as the site says. So Jean, I'd like your thoughts on that. Is starting it out at schools, sex ed, is that the way to go about changing perceptions? And what is that education like in schools?
Well, yes and no, because our Ministry of Education is known to be really conservative, and sex education in Singapore schools are mainly abstinence, where they are encouraged not to have sex, but the reality is that people do have sex. So LGBT students, young people are often excluded from life-saving information. So, I mean, I'm not sure, I disagree that, I'm not sure if school is the right place to start, or perhaps coming up with the best way to gain acceptance from, acceptance from people.
So then what is the best way?
Coming out is the best way. I mean, the last 10 years in Singapore, we've seen how with the internet, more and more people are coming out, more and more people are feeling empowered, and it changes people's minds. There's a recent poll in the papers that said that about 40 over percent of Singaporeans are for acceptance of gay people. So we know that every year there's an increase of 1%. So, I mean, perhaps in another 10 years' time, it will be beyond 50%.
But Rosanna, isn't there a real danger, especially in some of these countries, to coming out? I mean, I'm looking at a tweet here from Uma Rufika, and she says the problem is that gays are strange to most societies. Thus, the violence which just occurs is without calculation. So people being violent against things which they do not understand, but clearly there's a risk there in coming out.
Absolutely. I mean, it's not, okay for everybody to come out. It depends on their circumstances as well. I mean, if you're from a very rural area, for example, you'd think, twice and three times before you actually come out, because there's such a backlash, when that happens. Most gay people and lesbians and transgenders and bisexuals, they more or less migrate to the bigger cities, because they can't stand to be at home. But, violence is something that is prevalent everywhere. And I really feel that, we need to be a bit careful about how we proceed. But at the same time, we need to, if we are, in activism work, we need to take a few risks, because you can't make an omelette without breaking any eggs. So, yeah, it's a very delicate balance. Let's put it that way.
It also feels like a sort of figure it out as you go, right? I'm not sure that you actually have a blueprint to use, because there are so many different cultural and religious and societal issues. If you were to compare this to something in Europe or in the United States, you really can't blueprint off of that in terms of how you approach these issues in Asia, can you?
No, you can't blueprint, of Europe and the US, but I think that there are a lot of South-South exchanges going on. And by that I mean that within Asia, within the different sub-regions, there are exchanges going on. Activists are coming together to talk about good practices, things that work, things that didn't work, what they learned from what they did in their own country. And Rosanna is absolutely right, and Jean is absolutely right, when they say that you have to come out. But there are many ways of coming out. And, there are many ways to come out even in the United States. The important thing is that if people have to be prepared for a backlash, and there is a backlash going on now, and one can look at it as good, because that means people are listening to us, or they can say, oh, it's bad because of the activism, because of advocacy for rights, that's a backlash. The reality is that people who are opposed to anyone, whether it's opposed to women having rights, or opposed to people with disabilities having rights, or LGBT people having rights, or people from a particular ethnic minority having rights, there is going to be a backlash. And that, unfortunately, is the price that we have to pay. The difference is that when people in power, when the state can protect us and say, if you disagree with LGBT people, go ahead and express your opinion, but don't use violent tactics to attack LGBT people, because they too have a right to express themselves.
Powerful sentiments. Our community members have a question that I'd like to pose to you. This Way Out says, there's always controversy about how Western activists can help. And of course, we were just talking about the way that we can't blueprint this off of the West. He asks, how do Asian activists see it? And there's another tweet that says, I'm curious to hear from advocates whether the Obama administration's support of LGBT rights has had an impact in their countries. Would you care to answer that one?
I think people on the ground can probably answer the second question, whether the Obama administration's positions have made a difference in their countries. What was the first question again?
Well, the first one is, what can Western activists do, and how do Asian activists see it? Because there's controversy over, the West going in and telling maybe someone else, this is how you do things, this is how we did it here.
Right. I mean, frankly, I think that Asian activists are so sophisticated and they're so grounded in the realities in their countries that there might be some people who will listen to, having the Westerners come and tell us what to do, but many of them are doing their own movement, shaping their own movements. Of course, they learn a lot from what's happening in the West and happening in the United States, but I don't think that Asian activists are necessarily saying, okay, we will not listen to what the West is saying, but they're also not saying that because you're the West, we are going to listen to what you say. Yeah.
And of course, in some ways, Asian societies have surpassed the West in this regard. There have definitely been pride parades in places that you wouldn't necessarily see in all places in the U.S.
Yes.
The fact in Nepal, the categorization of a third gender. So definitely things that are more progressive, arguably.
Yes, definitely. I agree.
And we're going to want to get into that more in our post show, this idea of a third gender, other gender. And also I want to talk a little bit more, we were talking earlier in the program, but we just briefly touched on it, how these issues are treated in schools in Asia and how kids are being raised up in the educational system in terms of identifying or not identifying with non-conventional gender roles and gender identities. So we're going to tackle that in our online post show. So all of our guests are going to stay put. So if you're not already there, log on to stream.aljazeera.com to catch the rest of our conversation. But for now, Malika has a few other leads that we're following. So take it away, Malika.
What would you do if the price of your daughter's cancer treatment was suddenly raised by $200,000? That's a dilemma reportedly faced by the family of 5-year-old Croatian Nora Sitam, who suffers from an acute form of leukemia. Nora's family raised the $600,000 needed to treat their daughter at a renowned U.S. hospital, but the night before she was reportedly scheduled to travel, they received word that the treatment would cost an additional $200,000. That news enraged Croatians online. With nearly 90,000 likes on Facebook, Nora received an outpouring of support. Netizens also barraged the hospital online. Radrana writes, how can the price to treat a mortally ill little girl go up in a few days? As an American Croatian, I'm embarrassed. According to the Atlantic Wire, the spike in treatment costs may have been exaggerated. That $200,000 plus figure is the estimated cost of continuing treatment over the next few years. And according to a Croatian news site, it seems the mayor of Nora's town has agreed to cover the missing amount. Our next lead's from Kenya, where YouTube has launched a dedicated channel to cover the March election. The channel features interviews with party members, videos around election themes, and will live stream presidential debates. Google, which owns YouTube, has also launched a Kenyan elections hub, where you can watch the search trends and news mentions over time for each of the candidates. Let us know how you think we should cover the Kenyan elections. Tweet us your ideas with the hashtag AJStream. Lisa?
All right, stay with us because the post show is next at stream.aljazeera.com. Now on tomorrow's program, we ask what happened to the once powerful youth movement in Egypt. You probably have some thoughts on that or maybe some questions, so send those our way. And until then, we'll see you online. Welcome back. This is the Stream's online post show. We're talking about the rights of sexual and gender minorities in Asia and the reasons changing attitudes toward them. I want to get back to the conversation. Ines Angela, in Indonesia, tell us a little bit about this idea of a third gender. Nepal is now recognizing a third gender. Pakistan has done that for a long time. Explain that for people who don't really understand what it is.
I would like to say about the third gender. With my organization also involved in the citizen bill, for adding third gender into the ID card, but it's not also allowed.
Okay, Grace, can you explain, though, what that really means as a designation when you're talking about a third gender for people that don't understand what that is?
I think Sunil were here, but he has been one of the people who really wanted the term third gender used. He is opposed to the term transgender because transgender implies that there are only two genders. You transition from one gender to another. But third gender implies that in addition to the two genders, there's another gender. Other people say that why do you have to categorize it third? So there's first, second, third. So they prefer to say other genders, or they prefer to say, gender diversity. Basically, and I'm not an expert on third gender issues, but the category of third gender is in some countries there is legal recognition, which means you can your changed gender can be reflected in your ID cards, which means you can travel. In some countries you need your ID card to collect certain welfare benefits. You need it to collect certain rations. And if the people who are looking at your ID card say that, well, you don't look like the person on this card and therefore deny the person benefit. So it's very important that there is legal recognition, that the law recognizes changed gender.
We got a comment on Facebook from Javed who says, as a Nepali, I couldn't be more proud of my country when it comes to such issues. We're one of the first nations in Asia to legalize same-sex marriage as well. Long live Nepal. And I know there's a follow-up comment in our Google Plus Hangout from Charlize Sibaye, who's a member of the Society of Transsexual Women of the Philippines. Go ahead.
Charlize, go ahead. You're gonna need.
This is about the topic on coming out. It's a different dynamics for trans women than with the other members of the LGBT community, because for the LGBT community, they could choose whether or not to disclose their sexual orientation. But for trans people, when we decide to transition, it more or less equates to us coming out to the society. So when we do transition, it more or less is the coming out process already. So this is a comment.
Rosanna, talk a little bit about how these gender issues are taught in school. I mean, you're in Sri Lanka. If you can give us a broader view of how they're taught in parts of Asia. I'm sorry, Rosanna has gone from our hangout. Grace, maybe you can pick up on that. How are gender issues taught in schools in Asia? I mean, is it a fairly typical and consistent teaching, or does it vary by region?
I can't speak to that, but what I can say though is that, how is gender taught in most parts of the world? That there are only two genders. And not only that there are two genders, but that there is a particular way in which a boy is supposed to behave, and a particular way in which a girl is supposed to behave, a particular way in which a man is supposed to express his masculinity, and a particular way in which a woman is supposed to express her femininity. So if anybody crosses that, then you are immediately targeted, categorized for bullying, for punishment by teachers, by school principals, as well as by classmates. So I don't think so much it's about how gender is taught, but more of how gender is understood. What is gender? And we have to get away from the idea that there are only two genders and there are fixed ways of owning your gender.
So you say we have to get away from that, but I think a lot of the world is looking at this saying, well, do we get away from that physiologically, biologically? Is there science that tells us there are two genders? Because most of the world says there are men and there are women, and those are the two genders. And how does a third gender exist? How do you define a third gender?
I have a lot of personal opinions about this, but I'm not an expert on this. I hesitate to answer.
Rosanna, do you want to try to pick up on that in terms of identifying a third gender for people who say there are men and there are women? How do you just make up a third gender? How do you define what that is?
Well, I'm going to take the fifth on that myself because I'm no expert, but the problem, is that there needs to be some kind of recognition for transgender, transsexual people. Whether that's the third gender or not, I'm not really sure how one goes about that.
Well, Grace,
but the problems are immense.
I'm sorry for cutting you off there, but Grace, our community is just chiming in right now because they want to know if Thailand is an outlier. Kay says, in Thailand, LGBTs are accepted and ladyboys are widely known, but why are LGBTs ostracized in other Asian countries? Is Thailand an outlier?
Well, I mean, I think when I talk to my Thai activist friends, they say that there is this impression that Thailand is this paradise where, people can go to get gender reassignment surgeries. There's certain freedoms there. Katois or trans women are very visible. All of that is true. I've been to Thailand many times, and all of that is true. However, that doesn't mean there is no discrimination. It doesn't mean that trans people, gay people, are still seen as somehow "quote unquote" defective or inferior because they're not a man the way that they expect the man to be, or a woman the way the woman is supposed to be. So yes, it's very comforting and I think empowering to be visible when you're anywhere, in the mall, in the train station, in the airport, to see someone who's trans, because you say, oh wow, everybody's so visible, and it's not just in the context of a march or a parade or fighting in front of the courthouse. So that's a wonderful feeling to see that. But I don't want to also minimize the struggles that Thai trans people go through. Yeah.
All right, well, on that note, we are out of time, but our sincere thanks to you, Grace Poor, and to all the members of our Google Hangout. Now, for tomorrow's program, we're going to ask the question, what happened to the once powerful youth movement in Egypt? Send us your thoughts, your questions on that. Go to our website, streamed@aljazeera.com, and click that red button and send us a video comment or question. And until then, we'll see you online.